Hi and welcome back to Like Maria. Today I'm going to talk to you about Simon Armitage's poem Chainsaw versus the Pampas Grass. This is in Poems of the Decade. It will be really useful for anyone doing Edexcel English Literature on the Pearson specification. So please join in, like and subscribe. This poem actually appeared on the specification on the exam paper in 2020 in the October series, and I was really struck by one of the comments by the feedback from the examiner, who said, in a plea to teachers really, please don't allow your students to have one interpretation of the poem. The question was, explore how both poets make use of gardens. So it was requiring you to talk about the garden imagery and the significance of the garden in this poem. And the examiner complained that the students were just writing about how this was a poem, how men and women conflicted, and how some men attacked women and tried to dominate women, and women were resilient. So there was a great deal of chat about how students should not be shoehorned into one reading. So today I am going to try and answer some of that question about gardens and move away from the dogmatic experience of men and women in conflict as shown in this poem. That's not to say that, of course, there is quite a lot of thematic substance in this poem that does reflect a conflict between male and female. Okay, so I'm going to talk about not male and female conflict, but the exploration of power in this poem, the assault on nature in this poem, and the idea of rebirth and positivity that comes from nature and gardens. So bear in mind that question, compare how both poets make use of gardens. I'm not going to talk about the Rebecca Watts poem that was in the exam paper, just this one. So number one, I think Simon Armitage makes use of the garden in order to explore the idea of power. And he uses a narrative first-person voice here to reflect on moments in life when we overkill. If you look at the fourth stanza, this is very apparent. We have the imagery that is invoked. This was the sledgehammer taken to crack the nut. And then we have in the fourth line that word overkill with a full stop after it, and everything that is implied there by the caesura, by the definitive full stop, I have overkilled something. And this stanza is really reflecting on how power can sometimes be used in excess, and really it's the poet here and the narrator laughing. The voice in the poem is reflecting on what he's done, and it's overkill. He goes further, doesn't he, to pour the paraffin on and to flame it up to try and light it, and that doesn't work either. There's this mild irritation that's got to him about the pampas grass and its ludicrous feathers, and he's enraged by it. So I think this poem is an exploration of excessive power, ridiculous power, and the exercise of that, and the garden is used to show how that is foolish and ridiculous and sometimes not very successful. So we could build up a section of our essay in the exploration of how gardens are used, that this poet here is using the garden to explore the ridiculous nature sometimes of human reaction to something, of a need to quash everything in their path, of a need to exercise power. Second point, this poet is using gardens to look at assaults on nature. And we could have an ecological reading here, that this garden is not being allowed to develop in a kind of romantic sense, in a wild sense, and the pampas grass is not given space. Now, in one sense, the pampas grass is not given space because the curator of the garden, the person handling it, suggests that the pampas grass is taking the warmth and light from cuttings and bulbs and sunning itself, that the pampas grass is selfish, and that we need a gardener in order to allow the other things to survive underneath it. So One reading might be that taking care of a garden and curating a garden and looking after it is positive for all types of plants. On the other hand, we might see that man-made things in the garden are aggressive and are not taking care of it. We've got a sense that this here, and we could develop the reading of this chainsaw is almost raping nature. I took the saw and drove it vertically downwards into the upper roots. The blade became choked, like cutting water or air with a knife. There was an aggression and I think a sexual semantic field there of something being delved into in a way that it shouldn't be. And we have that line in the 1, 2, 3, 4th stanza, I ripped into pockets of dark secret warmth. So I think there is definitely here something suggesting perhaps a rape of nature, something that is unnatural and shouldn't be done to nature. But on the flip side, we have got the garden and the gardener taking care of nature and allowing the other plants to not to be overshadowed by the ludicrous pampas grass. So that's that ambiguity of reading there, and that's really what those examiners are talking about, how they don't want you to just jump in and say male, female, conflict. They want you to think about things and suggest alternative readings, and poetry can be difficult. It's not ever straightforward. The last section I'd like to look at is this idea of rebirth and the triumph of nature over mankind, and the hopefulness at the end of the poem. Despite being set alight and all this aggression by the man-made chainsaw, the end of the poem suggests that new shoots came up like asparagus tips, like this really precious crop of delicious food coming up. The Pampas grass is riding high in its saddle, wearing a new crown. The Pampas grass has triumphed. It's like a king of nature. It is strong and it is returning and it is riding high. There's also an interesting biblical allusion here, corn in Egypt. Now this goes back to the book of Genesis, where Jacob was talking about plentiful corn in Egypt. And these pampas grass fronds or stalks are very reminiscent of corn. And perhaps he's saying something here that the world is resilient, the world will always produce food, and mankind can bash at it and try to cut it down and try to wear it down, but it can be resilient, and that we should take hope in this. And the chainsaw is put away under its stairs and it's seething. The pampas grass is flourishing. Now, of course, the chief examiner would warn you away from taking this male-female competition and saying that the feminine pampas grass has ruled and has won. That's certainly a reading we can take, but if we're going back to our question about how gardens have been used, I think here gardens have been used to show the resilience of nature and to show this idea of rebirth and hope, and that perhaps there is some hope in the world despite mankind's and humankind's destructive nature. So there you have 3 areas of the poem that I am suggesting you look at as an alternative reading from that reading that the examiners have said don't take for granted. So I hope this has been helpful to you. Please like and subscribe.